Brilliant. Just while you're doing that, Karen, I was just about to say this session will be recorded, but the question and answer session at the end, it'll be stopped then if you've got anything you want to ask Karen.
Brilliant, thank you. So there we go. That should be me sharing my screen now. So you get a bit of a break from my face for a little while. And we'll get stuck into our session today on nurture supporting practitioners. So we're thinking about developing a nurturing approach to support the social and emotional well-being of the young people that we work with. So a little bit about me to start with. This is me looking slightly more glam than I am today because today is very hot and I'm also pregnant, so I'm feeling very much like an oven. So my name's Karen Watson. I've been teaching for 7 years, but I've worked with children with additional support needs for, I think it's coming up close to about 14 years now. And that's always been an area that I've been passionate about and enjoyed working in. So I graduated from University of the West of Scotland with my primary PGDE, and since then I've worked in specialist provisions across Edinburgh, Glasgow and Ayrshire. I'm originally from Ayrshire and ended up coming back here because I think you never fully escape. So recently my roles have been as principal teacher, and right now I'm just starting a period of maternity leave, which is quite exciting. So when I'm not in school, I present a radio show for Teacher Hug Radio, a fortnightly show about inclusion and accessible education. And I also podcast and post on Instagram as Scottish ESN teacher, and recently published my first book called Good Autism Practice for Teachers, Embracing Neurodiversity and Supporting Inclusion. And the whole point of that book, I know it says autism and it says teachers, and they're quite pointed keywords in that, but really it's about how can we take the good practice that we are showing in our specialist provisions and that we are using for our neurodivergent young people and apply that to all our children. We've got such a diverse population of children that we work with, and how can we really pinpoint those good strategies and embed them and embrace them throughout our education system. I also occasionally scribble the odd article for tests and present at training sessions and conferences. On a personal level, I spent most of my school days in the music department and have continued to play instruments into adulthood. I play in a local community concert band and particularly enjoy pretending to know what the buttons on my saxophone do and insisting that my flute is in tune and it's everywhere else that's the problem, especially the oboe player. So apologies to any oboe players out there, but I'm definitely in tune and you're not, I'm sorry. So I'm not a music teacher, but I do have a bit of experience with the system and certainly appreciate the benefits of music education. It's something that's been a huge influence in my life, and I count myself really lucky to be here speaking to all of you, as you've such an amazing role to play in children's lives. Creative education is so important, and a huge thanks to May for inviting me here to talk with you today. So let's get stuck in with what is a nurturing approach. So I thought this visual summed it up really nicely, so I'll let you have a wee look at that yourselves. I hate when you get a presentation and the presenter just reads straight off the slide, because if it was a reading lesson, we could do that separately. We can do that in our own time. If you've not listened to the TED Talk by Rita Pierson, I would strongly recommend getting it at the top of your to-do list. She's a really amazing woman. Anytime I'm having a little bit of a work wobble, if I've had a tricky day, I listen to Rita and it really reignites my passion for education and teaching. Essentially, she's saying that every child needs someone who thinks they are the most amazing person in the whole wide world and gives them that boost that they need. So every child needs someone right in their corner. And today we're going to look at how you can be that person. Personally, I think that music educators have a little bit of an edge here because one, you know, a lot of your children are there because they really want to be there. They want to be studying music, especially if you're doing individual tuition. That child wants to be there. They want to learn their instrument. Maybe not every single day they want to be there, but generally it's something they enjoy. It's a hobby. It's an outlet for them. And two, music is such a creative outlet, and we know that creativity can be a huge boost for a child who perhaps doesn't thrive in that strict academic setting. So you've got the power to create a positive and nurturing environment for a child that feels like they don't fit in anywhere else. And you've got the material to give that child a creative outlet for their life when they might not be experiencing success elsewhere in their school career. So you're to be the champion a child needs and hold them to those high standards while supporting them with warmth and calm. Excuse me. So now we'll look at nurture based on the 6 principles of nurture. So this might be something you've heard of before, and it's something that's a sort of thread that's going to run through this presentation. There are 6 principles, and those are the things we're going to focus on. We're going to learn about them. We're going to work out how they apply to your day, to your work, to your life. So I'll pop up a little visual here. So this visual, you'll be sick of seeing this by the end. And you can read through this yourself. So I start with the red one. So learning is understood developmentally. Then the environment offers a safe base. Nurture is essential for well-being. Language is a vital means of communication. All behaviour is communication. And transitions are important in children's lives. So this visual, as I say, it will crop up throughout this presentation. And by the end, you'll be able to recite it by heart. And you might even dream about it this evening. So I do apologise in advance. So let's just take a little minute just now to do just a little self-reflection on those 6 principles. So how do they relate to your current practice? Do you feel like you are equipped to meet those principles? Are there some that you're meeting already and you feel confident with? Are there some that you read and thought, oh yeah, I do that? I maybe just haven't labelled it as nurture or a nurturing approach before. So which ones do you feel are your strengths? Which ones do you feel are areas for improvement? So we'll do a little quick minute, and I'd like you to just take a little second and think, where is your strengths and where would you like to enhance your knowledge? So this isn't for anybody apart from yourself. I'm not going to insist everyone holds their notes up to the camera and stands up and shares. You know, this is for you, and it's to give a little starting point for this presentation so we can come back later and look at where we've got to. So once we've taken a wee minute to think and make a few notes, I'll chat through all the 6 principles. If anyone would like to share any strengths or worries, we have opportunities for that. And later we'll return to the notes to see if your confidence has increased. So I'll give you just a quick 30 seconds just now to jot down a couple of notes, and then I'll share my notes from the start of my journey in nurturing approach. So I'll be 30 seconds just now, and then we'll move on. Right, so I'll pop back in now, and I'll move on to my strengths and my areas for improvement that I sort of established when I first started reading and thinking about a nurturing approach and learning about it. So given that my background is additional support needs, particularly autism, behaviour, communication, those I felt were my strengths. So all behaviour is communication is something that I have parroted for years. It's one of my mantras, and it's something that I really strongly believe in. And so I felt that was a really important one for me that I felt I was strong with already. Obviously, there's room to learn for all of us, but I felt that was a strength of mine. And language being a vital means of communication. So we'll come back to this a wee bit later on, but by language, I'm not just meaning verbal skills, I'm meaning all communication. And transitions being important in children's lives. So obviously, if you're working with an autistic child, transitions can be very tricky. They can be something that's problematic for that child, and it's something that you're really aware of. So that was something that I had seen and worked hard on in practice, and then actually thought, but I should be using this with all children because all children could be benefiting from these strategies. My areas for improvement were learning to be understood developmentally, the environment offering a safe base, and nurture being essential for well-being. So those were the areas that I pinpointed when I started doing training and doing reading and doing research, thinking where do I need to put in that wee bit extra effort. So let's move on and we'll talk about the principles one at a time. So the first one is learning is understood developmentally. So this is about responding to a child's developmental level rather than their chronological age in a manner that's non-judgmental and accepting. So rather than thinking, is this age appropriate? Think, does the child enjoy it? Because really, if the child enjoys it, then it's age appropriate and they can have it, and that's okay. It's about taking that holistic view of education and considering your language and social and emotional development alongside the cognitive level. So it's not just thinking this child is primary 4 or this child is S2 and this is what they should be doing. It's looking wider than that and looking at who this person is as a whole. And we all have spiky learning profiles. We all have areas where we excel and areas where we maybe don't excel, and that's okay. And it's important for the child to appreciate that and understand that and know that that's okay, and it's not important to be brilliant at everything. So what can I do? I've put that on all of the slides for the principles. What can I do? What can you do? What can we be doing in school, in our tuition groups, in our individual lessons? What can we be doing to work towards this target? So a really good place to start here is looking at self-regulation and co-regulation. So regulation is a really complex process. It's basically your ability to stay on an even keel and to get back to that calm state if something happens. So it includes strategies and supports that can be done alone, which is your self-regulation, or alongside someone, which is co-regulation. So if you spend a bit of time building a positive relationship with a child, they'll trust you to take the lead and let you help them co-regulate. Self-regulation is very hard, especially for a child. They simply don't have the brain development at that point to be able to calm themselves down, to put it really simply. They need help, they need guidance, they need to be shown strategies. And if they trust you to take the lead with co-regulation and you model those strategies, like things like taking a deep breath, taking a break away from something, taking a walk, going and doing another activity for 5 minutes and coming back. Anything that helps you feel calm when you are upset or distressed or dysregulated, that will help the child feel calm. And it's just about working out what works for you, what works for them, modeling it to them, and then eventually in time, it will lead to them being able to use that strategy on their own to self-regulate. So the goal when working on regulation is to build a bank of strategies that the child can access if they feel anxious, dysregulated, or upset. And when you co-regulate, you're taking your calm to meet a child's dysregulation and helping them back to that optimal state of calm. So we're using strategies that are appropriate to the child and the situation and making them consistent and reliable. And that's what I mean as well when I say we're working on a child's developmental level rather than their cognitive level. Because if you have a 4th year student who is really struggling to manage their anxiety and their anger, they are perhaps developmentally not at that S4 level, and that's okay. So we need to peel that back and we need to think, well, where is this person? Where are they sitting? Are they able to self-regulate? No, well, we need to co-regulate with them and we need to help them. And we need to put those strategies in place that we can consistently respond to and show and model those strategies. So another way to do, to work towards your understanding developmental learning is to scaffold your learning. So reinforcing prior learning and scaffolding it onto your future learning. So this is something that we talk about all the time. We talk about scaffolding learning, but really pull back to that. Spend time going over your previous content, give that praise, and then build on to new concepts, because delivering that praise and having an excuse to deliver that praise is building that positive relationship that underpins our nurturing approach. So we're building self-confidence, we're building self-esteem through repeated positive learning experiences. And that's really important for a child. They'll feel seen, they'll feel heard, they can show you that they're doing well with something. And then when they're not doing so well with something, it's okay, because we've shown them that they can do well with something. It's not just, oh, I'm rubbish at everything, I'm crap at all of this, and we've all heard that from a child, and it's really heartbreaking if a child thinks they're absolutely mince at everything they're doing, and they're not. But we need to lay those building blocks of positivity, and it can be quite tricky to do, because if you have expectations of how a lesson's going to go, if you have expectations of where a child's going to achieve, just pull them back a little bit, and then everyone will be pleasantly surprised. So moving on to principle 2, the environment offers a safe base. So this principle is based on offering a safe, welcoming environment. So combining this with the promotion of emotional safety, and this leads to feelings of physical safety. And this is going to help a child's anxiety, it's going to help their dysregulation, they're going to feel so much calmer and so much happier. And a calm child is a learning child. You can't teach anything to a child who is scrape off the ceiling anxious and distressed. It's just not going to happen. So we need to get the calm and the anxiety free first. So what can you do? So we'll start with the positive relationships. So I alluded to this a little bit in principle 1, but let's really get stuck into positive relationships now. So in any setting, the key to a cohesive work environment is a positive relationship. And it applies even more when working with children. We want to promote that working environment through respect, encouragement, and accessibility. So working through the lens of a positive relationship can be a huge mindset change, but the ultimate goal is to build an atmosphere built on trust and respect, and that goes both ways. So a good place to start is with child-led learning. So this doesn't mean letting a child do whatever they fancy for your 45 minutes or whatever. It means you're noticing their needs, you're setting safe boundaries, respecting opinions, and empowering that child. You're giving them a choice. And for some children, they don't get to make many choices in their own lives. They don't get much control over their own lives in their own time. So by giving them small, safe choices that actually don't really matter in the grand scheme of things, you're empowering that child. And I think specialist teachers have a bit of an advantage here. Because, as I said before, generally a child's coming to you because it is part of their special interest. They enjoy music, they enjoy creativity. And you share a common interest. How amazing is that when you're building a positive relationship to already have a common interest? And some days might be easier than others to engage that child, but use the good days to build that relationship. Share successes, empower the child to feel good about themselves. And then when they're having a bad day, it's easier to manage and help. So when you start working with a class, a group, an individual child, take a wee moment to sit and assess your goals. Ask yourself, where is my relationship with this child now? Where do I want it to be in a month's time? And how can I support this child in this new start together? What do they need from me? And then you can use this to inform your practice. So get to know a child, work out their likes and dislikes, learning strategies, communication preferences, and allow that relationship to grow naturally. So another thing you can be doing is to provide a safe, predictable, and consistent routine. So when we're talking about the environment, obviously a classroom is the environment, but if you are a specialist tutor, you might not be in the same room every time. You might not be, you're changing buildings, you're changing, you might be all over the place, and that's okay, because the environment doesn't need to be the physical environment. You can be the environment. You can create that environment, that safe place. So ideally, we want a settled and calm classroom full of pupils that are ready to learn. And how are we going to get that? We're going to provide a predictable and reliable setting where the children know the expectations and they understand what they have to do. So if you can create an environment with no surprises, a routine that children can follow as independently as possible, and one that's accommodating and adaptive to their needs, this child no longer has that excess anxiety of wondering what's happening today. As I said, an anxious child's not a learning child. So we need to neutralise that anxiety and free up brain space for learning. It's teaching a child how to learn by providing that consistent atmosphere and routine. So applying a consistent approach to your teaching, it does take time and planning, and it doesn't happen overnight. But the benefits of using a consistent approach are decreased anxiety, increased focus on the learning opportunities, and actually in the long run, it's less organising and last minute planning for yourself. And who does not love the sound of that? So this includes part of the environment offering a safe base. It includes a consistent approach to de-escalation. So what's de-escalation? It's essentially bringing a situation back to normality. So something has happened, and whether something has happened with a child, with a group of children, there's been an incident, there's been a disruption, something has happened, and we need to work to bring that environment back to that safe place for that child and for the other children. We want the classroom to be a place of low anxiety, calm, and being settled and happy. That's our baseline goal. And things will happen to disrupt that. Low-level disruption, high-level disruption, things will happen, and that's okay. So it does depend. If you're based in a school, there'll be a school policy, there'll be a management policy, but there are some general de-escalation tips we can follow to try and offer that consistent approach. So a dysregulated adult cannot calm a dysregulated child. So take a minute, take a breath, work on your own calm. If you need to get some help in a situation, that's absolutely fine. That's not going to make a child feel less safe. You stop and reduce your language, listen and label a child's feelings, and offer positive choices. So, for example, if you are with a child who is swearing and shouting, instead of getting into that battle of wills, no swearing, stop shouting at me, give them a positive choice out of the situation and offer them that safe choice, that control of having a choice out of the situation. They may feel like they've lost control, particularly, put my teeth back in, for a demand avoidant child. The feeling of control is so important, but offering a choice and a positive choice of two things that you're happy with happening. Would you like to take a break or would you like to sit down? It gives them a positive way out of this situation and maybe something they can latch onto. Stay positive, co-regulate, go back to our regulation strategies, model those regulation strategies you know a child's familiar with. And at the end of the day, some children just need you to be there and wait it out. And that's part of you being the safe environment. You might not be able to offer that positive instruction, that choice for a while. You might just have to sit and wait it out. And that's okay to just be there with them if they are anxious, if they are dysregulated, if they are stressed. You are there and that is enough sometimes. Just a wee side note here. Watch your language if that's the situation. If that is a situation you find yourself in and you're waiting it out with a child, I've heard so many people saying things like, you're okay, you're fine, but they're not okay and they're not fine. And it's really important to label those feelings and those emotions accurately, because if you're labeling that feeling of being really upset and really angry as fine, we're going to have to go back and do some work on emotional literacy later on because that's not accurate. So things like saying, I'm here with you, or you're safe, are important ones to use. You can also work to develop a sense of belonging in the environment. And this can be tricky, especially if you don't have a consistent classroom, or if you're moving rooms frequently, if you are working in a secondary school, the children are coming and going. But you're the environment and what you bring with you, how you present your material, how you interact with the young people, and generally the atmosphere you create with your presence in your lesson. That's the environment, not the room, not the four walls that you're in. So principle 3, nurture is essential for well-being. So this principle helps us consider how to develop and support resilience. So resilience is such a buzzword just now. And I think it's important to put in here that this isn't just limited to the children that we're working with. We need to build resilience in ourselves, families, and other stakeholders. This is not just about building up a child, it's a group effort. How can we model good practice if we can't be resilient ourselves? As I said, a dysregulated adult can't calm a dysregulated child. So there's 3 key aspects to resilience: sense of belonging, sense of power, and sense of self. And those are the 3 things we can work on. So what can I do? What can you do to work on this principle? Be available for conversations and encourage problem solving with the child rather than just offering ready-made solutions. This really supports resilience. This helps a child apply what they've learned in this situation to future situations and is a really nice way of learning from something that's happened. And model techniques for regulation. Again, it's all coming back to the same key points: managing anxiety and well-being, when they're thinking about resilience, remember that it's not something you can directly teach. It's more modelling and explained through teaching of emotional literacy. And one thing that I found really useful when learning about resilience was a article by Dr. Ginsberg. I think it was originally published in 2013. And it was resilience can be broken down into 7 components. So I'm just going to read those off for you just now. I'm not going to go into too much detail. If you're interested, it's Dr. Ginsberg, the 7 C's of resilience. So obviously I like them because they all start with the same letter, and that really appeals to my brain as well. So they are competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. So all of these are key in developing resilience. And I bet you've got most of these things incorporated into your practice already, but maybe haven't quite labelled them as a resilient teaching tool. Excuse me. So principle number 4, language is a vital means of communication. So this principle is about understanding that language is more than just a skill to be learned and can shape our thinking, behaviours and feelings. Language may look very different for different children. So augmented and alternative communication, AAC, is becoming much more mainstream, and as part of our nurturing approach, we should be inclusive of this. So you may have seen things in schools, you may have seen photos, symbols, iPad, talking devices, textbooks, pod books, just to give a few examples. There's loads of different ways that we are augmenting our communication with symbols and additional products and strategies. And it's not about taking away from the verbal language. And I think this is a big misconception about using symbols and using visuals. It's not taking away from that verbal language, it's adding to it. So you're not using symbols or these strategies to replace your speech. You're using it alongside your speech. And there are so many children that this benefits. So it benefits autistic children, it benefits children with ADHD, it benefits children with dyslexia, and it benefits children with executive functioning difficulties as well. So verbal information is so transient, it's come and it's gone. And if you haven't fully understood an instruction, or if you weren't fully focused on knowing that instruction was coming, knowing it was being delivered to you, if there's any sort of breakdown in the communication chain at all, you're not going to get that instruction, and it's transient, it's gone, it's flown away. But if you have a clear, tangible example of that instruction in front of you, whether that's in the form of a symbol, of a photo, of a prompt somehow, you can get that back and you can take as long as you need, and you can take that processing time to really deeply understand that instruction. And we'll come back to this a wee bit more later, but written words are also visuals. So I know that sounds a little bit strange, but they are part of the visual structure we use. Now, as an adult, I use written words and lists all the time. I have a to-do list on my phone, I have a diary. That's all visual supports that I'm using to help me communicate and to help me understand. And it's not a bad thing, you know, it's not, I don't think that that's a bad thing that I need to write a to-do list. Maybe a bad thing that I feel compelled to colour code it and takes far too much time doing that. But it's not a bad thing. And what I've been taught is that writing a to-do list helps me organise my thoughts and my ideas and my time. And that's a strategy that works for me. So it's just about working out what a child needs and sort of following through with that and teaching them those strong strategies. So I've got a little off track here. I'll get back on. As you can see from the start, when I said this is one of my strengths, it's also one of my favourable rants. So we'll get back on track here. So just to sum up briefly, some children communicate verbally, some are pre-verbal, some will have certain verbal skills, but verbal skills can be really easily lost if a child is angry or anxious or dysregulated in any way. You'll find that yourself. If you feel really angry about something, sometimes you just can't get your words out and you just feel like you're going to explode because your verbal skills have just gone out the window. And that's okay. And we can put some things in place so that even when we can't access those verbal skills, we can still help a child and we can still communicate with a child. So using visual supports all children. As I said, verbal information is transient, visual information is permanent. And incorporating visual delivery into your practice, it really levels the playing field for all of your pupils. So when I was writing my book, I did a little bit of research into the number of children, the proportion of children who have a diagnosed additional need that are sitting in our classrooms. And obviously we have a number of children in specialist provisions. We also have a number of children in mainstream schools who have a diagnosis, and we need to be putting stuff in place for them. So do you know there's up to 30% of a primary school classroom, those children will have a diagnosis of one type or the other. And that's only the ones who've been diagnosed as well. When you think the amount of children who slip through the system, you know, autism is something that's much more routinely diagnosed in boys than it is in girls, because our standard presentation of autism is very skewed towards males. And myself, I'm dyslexic. I didn't get diagnosed until I was 17 years old. You know, it's people are slipping through those nets, and what we need to be doing is creating accessible education for everybody. And in this particular situation, that means augmenting your language with visuals and using all these supports that are at our fingertips and using those to help aid our delivery. One thing that it really helps me with as well is not having to repeat myself 20 times, which I quite enjoy. So if you have got some visuals saying what's going to happen in your class today, what's the order of things that are going to happen, if you've got a list, a checklist written, you know, on your smartboard saying we're going to do this, I need you to have done these 5 things and then we're going to move on, it saves you having to answer the same question 25 times. So it's saving your patience as well. And it's all about that when we're talking about resilience being a two-way street. It's all a two-way street. You know, this nurturing approach, it's about nurturing the children, but it's also about giving us a positive place to work and a positive place to be. And that's really important too. So totally lost my train of thought there. I've got a note about visual timetables, and I don't know how I'm planning on getting from that to visual timetables. So we'll just do a quick jump and you can pretend you're following my train of thought. So things like a visual timetable, where you're showing a child what's happening now, what's happening next. And even just, I say, that checklist, this is what you're expected to get done in this class. There's a wee list, so you don't have to ask me 17 times. So if you're doing individual tuition as opposed to classroom-based learning, things like having a photo of yourself for the class teacher to use, so that if the child is unsure, you say, oh, such and such is coming today for your music lesson, and they can pop that on the timetable. Or they can have a little note saying, Mr. and Mrs. Nix, you know, they are coming today for your music lesson, and they can have that access. And it's just joining that up. So it's not just someone turning up out of nowhere and going, right, you, let's go, time for your lesson. And if a new child starts with you, things like having a wee pack with your photo in it, the room you'll be using, it all depends on that developmental level of the child. Sometimes older children will not appreciate getting a photo of you beforehand, and that's okay too. You know, the key things to remember with visuals are the consistency, accompanying them with your verbal language, and also if you're using visuals for a child, if you're using a system that works, you don't need to remove it. It's not about working towards getting rid of that system. It's incorporating them into your plan for consistency. So another couple of just what can I do points here. We're going to listen and we're going to validate emotions. So emotional literacy is a huge learning area. And by labeling them, we can then put in those strategies for co-regulation, which leads to self-regulation, which leads to a really calm, happy child. Children might have difficulties identifying and managing their emotions, which relates back to their language, especially expressive language and the fact that emotions are quite unpredictable. So emotional literacy and resilience are skills for life that we can teach in order to give those regulation strategies. But first we need to enable children to identify their emotions and label them. And this is where our language comes in. How are we labeling those emotions in the moment? How are we making sure that the child has the vocabulary, the words, the visuals to really identify those emotions? Because it's very difficult to provide a nurturing approach if we can't have those discussions about emotions and about, you know, the not so nice emotions. It's very easy to label a child and say, oh, I think you're happy, you're smiling. But it's also really important to label those negative ones. You know, I think you're angry, you've knocked all your work onto the floor, you know, and giving them those words, giving them that vocabulary so that they can express themselves and they can tell us, this is how I feel, this is what I need. And that's going to make our lives a lot easier in the long run rather than us having to guess. So once we've labelled emotions, we can move on to looking at the physical attributes and sensations that go with them. So we can really think about how that emotion feels to that child and how they can maybe start to identify that emotion before it all bursts out. You know, if they're angry, before something goes flying across your classroom, before someone starts swearing at you, you know, if we can identify those things bubbling up and then put in a little strategy, then that's where we need to intervene. That's where our intervention needs to be based. And it's not about distracting a child from the emotion. All emotions are valid. It's again about giving that positive choice and helping that child feel more in control of the situation. If a child can implement a predictable response in the middle of a dysregulated episode, it gives them a positive break and it turns the situation around. So instead of a child getting increasingly frustrated, perhaps unable to articulate it properly and getting angry or upset, you can step in, identify the emotion and offer a solution. Would you like to take a break? Perhaps we can move on to a different activity and come back to this another day. And just a quick note on offering breaks. I am very much about offering breaks. I think they are brilliant, but they're not a reward. So there's a big difference between getting a break from something that a child is struggling with to having a little rest because they've done really well at something and you're like, well, just go and do something non-disruptive for 5 minutes to the rest of us catch up. A break's not a reward. If a child needs a break, they shouldn't have to earn it. You know, sometimes as an adult, I'm doing something and I think I just need to not be looking at this for 5 minutes. And, you know, I need to step away from my laptop. I need to step away from what I'm doing and just take a little breath. And then I come back and I'm fresh and it's better than waiting until I get upset or frustrated with the situation. And it's the same for a child. We're just teaching them that these things are okay and it's okay to have emotions and it's okay to talk about them and it's okay to manage them in a way that works for them. So really think about your non-verbal communication when we're talking about communication. And so this is your body language, expression, gesture, tone, situational clues, everything except your words. So a listener will get a lot of information from your non-verbal communication. And especially when we're thinking about applying a nurturing approach, a child can take a lot from your body language and how you're speaking to them, the tone you're speaking to them. A child knows straight away if you think they are a pest or if you actually want them there and you want them to be successful. They're very perceptive, small people. And it's really important that we are in control of our non-verbal communication. And even if it's a child that you don't particularly get on with and you don't have that positive relationship with, that's okay because we don't get on with everyone in life. And that's also an important lesson for a child to learn. But at the end of the day, you're the adult and you need to take the lead with that and not let a child feel like they are excluded or unwelcome. So feelings can be interpreted through your non-verbal communication, especially if they differ from your verbal content. So if you're saying something positive, but your body language and your expression is very closed off, a child is totally going to interpret that and they're going to understand that. And a non-verbal communication can sometimes mask difficulties for a child. A child might be really skilled at interpreting standardized clues, and it might appear like they've understood a spoken request when really you've just shown some predictable non-verbal communication. Excuse me. So right now I am going through a little bit about, as adults we're using visuals all the time, but I've already had my little ramble about that, so I'm going to spare you a doubler of that. And we'll move on to our fifth principle, which is all behaviour is communication. Now, this is a really popular saying, I think, at the moment. It's one that I use a lot. And it's been a huge mindset change for me, thinking about behaviour as communication. It really has. It's been a long transition for me into thinking this way, but a really meaningful one for my practice. So let's take a little look deeper here. So it's about looking into the why behind the behaviour. So all behaviour has a function, it has a purpose. And just because that function is not immediately obvious, it doesn't make it less valid. So behaviour serves a purpose for that child, just like any form of communication. And if it's not an appropriate way to communicate that need, then it's up to us to teach an alternative. It's really that simple. So we teach numeracy and we teach literacy and we teach other things explicitly, yet expect behaviour to happen organically. But like any other core subject, behaviour is something that must be taught, modelled and consistently responded to. And this is all behaviours, not just ones that are perceived negatively. If you know the function, you can meet the need. So what can we do? So look for the function or the need behind the behaviour. So a quick fire way to do this is to use the acronym SEAT, so SEAT. Generally, behaviour can be attributed to one of the following: sensory, escape, attention, or tangible. Now, not all behaviours are going to fall under these, but it's a sort of quick, let's just assess where this behaviour is coming from. And some behaviours will need to look a lot deeper, and some will fall into one of these categories, and it makes it just a little bit easier, a little bit simpler for us to then work out what the need is and how we can replace that function. So we'll take a wee quick look at them individually and see if we can preempt issues this way. So sensory. By this I mean, does the child have any sensory integration or sensory processing needs? Sensory processing is essentially the way an individual takes in, processes and reacts to sensory stimuli. So difficulty with sensory processing is a key feature noticed in autistic children, but they're not unique to autistic people. All of us have sensory preferences. And this could be something like not liking a bright light, or the tag on the back of your clothes being a little bit irritating for you. We all have our own preferences, but hypo and hypersensitivities, which are over or under sensitivities, are much more prevalent in the autistic population. The sensory processes are not fixed in an individual. They have the capacity to fluctuate depending on anxiety and environment. And a sensory profile is a really individual thing. We all have individual specific preferences, dislikes, and intolerances. And just a wee note here to say a dislike and an intolerance are different, but they should both be respected. So we've got our 8 senses. We've got vision, our sense of sight; auditory, which is hearing; olfactory is smell; gustatory is taste; tactile is touch; vestibular is balance and movement; proprioception is our sense of where we are in space; and interoception is our internal sensations, what's going on inside your body. So that's things like needing the bathroom or being thirsty, being hungry. And I briefly mentioned hypo and hypersensitivity, and this is essentially when an individual is over or under sensitive to a sensory stimuli. So you may have heard of the window of tolerance. We all have a window where we feel at our best, we're calm, our needs are met, and we can engage. Our tolerance levels vary between each other in different situations. And if we're right in the middle of that window, we can regulate for little blips. For example, there's a bird outside tweeting while you're trying to concentrate. And we've got strategies we can use to settle ourselves. Like I said before, things like taking a break. These are all little strategies that can be built in for us. But for a child who has a smaller window, one perceived small thing might send them out their window. Now, when they go out, they're dysregulated. They can either go up into your big behaviours, your distress, your upset, your anger, or you go down. And this is when a child withdraws. They might stop speaking or retreat to a quiet place. They might run away from what's happening. So the second function is escape. This is when a child removes themselves from the situation. That might be an activity or an interaction where a child is either over or under stimulated by the content. If an activity is too simple or too difficult, it won't engage a child and they won't maintain their focus. So it's not about forcing compliance with an activity, but giving clear outlines, clear boundaries of what's happening, and ensuring there's motivators and breaks involved if needs be. The third function is attention. So this seeks to gain a connection, an interaction. The key feature here is that it's a predictable interaction. If a child needs a connection and knows that if they start swearing at you, you'll verbally interact with them, even though you're saying, stop swearing at me, then it's a really reliable way to get your attention if your attention is elsewhere and they need some. A way to avoid this negative association is to model regular positive interactions and give appropriate alternatives to connect with you. I've seen some nice visuals on desks where children can turn, like it's like a little laminated piece of paper and it's maybe green on one side and red on the other side. And if it's red, they are busy, they're involved with their work. If they turn it over to green, it means that they would like a bit of conversation, a bit of chat about what they're doing. And the teacher can really easily see who is on green, who's on red. And if you see someone's on green and you've got 3 other people, you can say to them, listen, I'm going to be 5 minutes and then I'm going to be with you. I've got so and so and so and so first. And it just gives that way to get that attention, to get that connection without it becoming a negative association. And the final behaviour function is tangible. So a tangible function is related to getting an item or an object that the child wants. Generally, a child's learned if they behave in a certain way, they get a preferred item. Technology can be huge here. So the best way to approach this is to just regularly visit that preferred item in a controlled manner. You're not dangling it as a bribe, you're not removing it as a punishment, and the desire to have it over time will decrease because the child knows it's available regularly. So when we're thinking about behaviour and behaviour as communication, it's really useful to consider the structure and functions of the brain and how they're integrated, and really look into the why. So the right brain is holistic, emotional, creative. A child at a young developmental level might be quite right brain dominant. So this is again where we're looking back to learning being understood developmentally. You know, a child's age might be very different from their developmental level, and it may mean they have differing brain function. So a child who's at a young developmental level might be right brain dominant, living in the moment, led by creativity and emotions. This changes over the years, and a child will become more left brain dominant, questioning surroundings and concepts. This is often the why stage. Why for everything. But this helps us understand how we need to teach a child to integrate both sides of their brain, to promote that emotional literacy, and to engage with that behaviour as a communication idea. So emotional behaviour is the result of right brain activity. And if we teach the logical regulation, we can stimulate integration with the left side of the brain. Now, I know this all sounds really wordy, but it's really simple at heart. It's labelling those emotions and providing and modelling consistent regulation strategies, and then debriefing afterwards. So once you've established a function to behaviour, you can look at other ways to meet those needs. So preempting issues, putting in regulation strategies before behaviour occurs will help provide that really consistent supportive environment. Another strategy you can use for this principle is to reframe the behaviour. So I am super passionate about changing the lingo. That's my little buzzword for it. And really interrogating the language we use when referring to children. A huge part of the nurturing approach is changing our perspective, and our language is a huge part of that. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here because I am running out of time a little, and this could go on all night, and I want to get you out and enjoy the sunshine. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of how I personally have changed my language and how it's changed how I frame behaviours. So changing the phrase attention seeking to connection seeking. Attention seeking has such negative connotations. And really, if a child needs attention, we need to give them attention. If they need a drink, we'll give them a drink. It's a basic need. It's Maslow before Bloom. It's meeting those basic needs before we move on to the more complex ones. Changing behaviour management to relationship management. it pulls the onus off the child a little bit. I'm not placing all the responsibility on the child for their behaviour. I'm taking some of that responsibility into building that positive relationship. Oh, excuse me. And changing challenging behaviour to distressed behaviour, it just frames it differently. Because really, who's the child challenging? You know, they're distressed, they're showing their distress, and we'd like to help with that. So moving on to our last principle, principle 6. This principle is about recognising the importance of transitions in a child's life, from small transitions between activities to large ones like moving school or life events. Transitions are change, and change causes anxiety. A key thing to keep in mind, though, is that adapting to change is attainable for everyone as long as we're adequately supported to do so. So if we're teaching for adaptability and surprise, we're laying foundations for a young person who can show resilience when met with unexpected change. So what can you do about this? What is your role in this here? So my top 5 tips for supporting transitions: prepare. So prepare yourself, resources and prior learning, prepare the child. Use your visual supports. Use your structure and consistency. Reduce your language and give really specific praise within that transition. So I'll just make a wee note here. One good thing to use for a transition is a social story. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about social stories here. I just wanted to mention them. They're an excellent tool for using to support transitions in children's lives. So I thought just now we could have a really, really quick self-reflection on the 6 principles, and just a little thought about how are you feeling now about them? Do you feel a bit more confident? Do you feel like, one thing that I really noticed when I first started thinking about a nurturing approach was how many things I do already, but I haven't quite labelled them as such. I hadn't really thought about, oh, that's part of my nurturing approach. It was just something I did. And I thought that was really interesting. So what we'll do, I'll leave this with you and I'll move on just now, but do come back to this later and just have a little think about how much more confident you're feeling now. If anyone has any questions or anything, there's time for questions at the end. And also, I'm happy to take emails. I'm happy to take me messages afterwards if you go away and think about something and think, oh, I wish I'd spoken about that. So I just wanted to run through a couple of quick key elements of nurture. So I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading these off, but just think when you're planning your lessons and your curriculum, think about how you can implement your routine and structure. Things like your lessons following a consistent format, using visuals, especially within your groups to promote accessibility. When meeting a child or a new group, take that time to work on building that positive relationship. There's no point jumping in the deep end and trying to teach a concept when there isn't mutual trust and respect. And then we've got some key values of nurture. So one thing that I think is really important to think of here is those high expectations. You know, having a nurturing approach does not mean we are lowering our expectations of children. We have high expectations. It's just balancing that with boundaries and warmth and calm, and really embedding that nurturing approach throughout the school and across a child's day, ensuring that everyone is respected, staff, stakeholders and children, and balancing those high expectations, as I said, staff working together to understand reasoning behind behaviour and how a child's presenting. So I'm actually going to take an executive decision and skip over the next 2 slides. So I'll show you them very quickly. Just, it was going to be a little ramble anyway. So I was going to make a quick comment about attachment theory. It's a whole presentation within itself, but within the context of nurture, it's important to have an overview. So if we don't, we just run the risk of scraping the surface of a nurturing approach. But essentially, a child needs to feel safe and secure in order to learn. The knowledge of the importance of early life experiences and promoting positive relationships will lead to an enhanced teaching ability. And a quick note too on adverse childhood experiences. Again, it's a whole training, it's a whole course in itself. But adverse childhood experiences have long-lasting effects on a person's life, and they relate directly to nurture as building those positive relationships and having a safe and secure space might be quite unfamiliar for a child, but we need to be consistent, positive, and predictable, and we can provide that safe place for a child who might be crying out for it. Again, balancing that caring approach with high expectations. Do not lower your expectations of children and think that is how you are being nurturing. No, nurturing them to be the best that they can possibly be. Remember Rita Pearson and holding that child up, being their champion, putting them on our shoulders and holding them to high, high expectations. Boundaries need to be explicit and fair. We are able to put in and explain and enforce boundaries, but there's no point putting in a punitive consequence which isn't viable. So we're moving away from punishment and we're thinking more about preempting with boundaries. An interesting way to think of this is through restorative practice. So there's a little bit of information at the end about some extra reading on restorative practice, but it's a way to avoid traditional punishments and give the chance to unpick a situation, look for the function, and promoting emotional literacy and integrating both sides of the brain. So this is a few examples of some questions that a restorative practice practitioner, what a word, might sit down with a child and ask, after an incident, what's happened? What were your thoughts? What have your thoughts been since? It's a supportive and positive conversation, but you need that positive relationship in there first. A child needs to be able to feel safe to open up and be honest. So then we are coming very close to the end. I only have 2, 3 more. We will flick through these. So some general tips. Give you a second to read these over. The first one's really important. Don't be too hard on yourself. So don't beat yourself up if things aren't working out properly or you'd feel like you're not getting a child. There are lots of other adults in this child's life, especially in school, and you're not going to be able to be that champion for every single child you meet. But also, you only need to be that for one child, you know? You can make such a difference in one child's life. So don't beat yourself up if there's a particular child that you just don't feel like you're getting. A quick caveat from me about nurture groups. So nurture groups are separate to doing a nurturing approach. They're not separate, they're all hand in hand. Nurture groups are run by specifically trained teachers and, well, specifically trained individuals and include at least one GTCS registered teacher. There's limits on group numbers and key skills to focus on. So in doing this training, you are not qualified to run a nurture group. I'm sorry, I'm not qualified to teach you that, but we can all think about the nurturing approach and how we can broaden it to work through our whole school. And then just a couple of small points that I thought we could try. Let me just make sure I'm going to get everyone without skipping them on. There we go. These are just how I thought nurture approaches would work in a music class. So obviously I'm not a music teacher. I'm not the expert. You guys are the experts here. You are going to take this information and run with it. But these are just ways that I thought it might help. So if you're in a music class, whether that's in like a secondary setting, whether you're taking a group in primary, whether you're taking a tuition group, these are things that might help with that. And then following that, this is my kind of thoughts towards more individual lessons. So the total communication approach, I know again that's a little bit of a buzzword, but that's just using your visuals, augmenting your language, having all these different aids in place so that you're not relying on verbal delivery for children, especially with younger children. If you're working with a small group in primary, maybe just starting some instrumental tuition, it can be really helpful to maybe have 4 or 5 things that you do every lesson and just have a little symbol for each one and have that displayed wherever you are so the child can see, right, I go to this class, I do this, and then it's finished and I come back next week. That can be really useful for younger children or for children who are developmentally at that level. So that is us got to the end. I'll give you a little second to just take a look here if you want to take any notes down, just some information about some things that I found useful. So the first book, If You Can't Reach Them, You Can't Teach Them by Kevin Hewitson. It is a whole book on how to build positive relationships. It's packed with self-reflection, It is a really brilliant book, and it's like a diary almost. You scribble in it, you write in it, it's brilliant. Paul Dix has written 2 books, so When the Adult Changes, Everything Changes, and After the Adults Change, and there's a lot of restorative practice, a lot of nurturing approach in there. I've already plugged my book at the start, so I won't beat you over the head with it, but if you are interested, it's called Good Autism Practice for Teachers, and it's written from an additional support needs angle, but throughout the book, the point is we should be providing support to all children to promote accessible education. And a lot of things we've discussed, like total communication, positive relationships, and behaviour as communication, they're core chapters within the book. So there is stuff there for everyone. The other the things that I've written here, so there's a Nurturing School Pack on Glow, which is a really interesting document, and Applying Nurture as a Whole School Approach by Education Scotland is also a brilliant document to read. If you're looking for some more information on attachment and ACEs, good names to look up are Suzanne Zedek, Jerry Diamond, and Dr. Bruce Perry. And then there's just my contact details at the bottom. So I'm going to pop off my screen share and pop back to my lovely face. And then I think we've got a wee bit of time for some questions. If anyone has any questions, you can pop them in the chat function.